Chen got a standing ovation for work he didn't do. Everyone in the room applauded. Except one person, Priya Nair. Because while Marcus was celebrating, she was already preparing to destroy everything he built. Revenge tales present. The Silent One. A revenge story how a quiet employee destroyed the career of the man who stole everything from her. The day Chen stood at the front of that boardroom, smiling, accepting a standing ovation for a project that wasn't his, Priya didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She didn't say a word. She just sat in the back row, opened her notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page. How it begins. Most people when they're wronged react. They confront. They escalate. They send the angry email at 11 p.m. that they immediately regret. Priya was not most people. She'd spent the last 4 years being invisible on purpose. Watching. Bernie. Building something quietly. Something no one in that office knew existed. And Marcus had just made the worst mistake of his professional life. He just didn't know it yet. Priya Nair had joined Veritas Analytics 3 days after finishing her MBA, 26 years old, carrying a second-hand laptop and a folder of ideas that, if anyone had actually read them, would have changed the direction of the entire company. Nobody read them. That wasn't unusual. He was a junior analyst fresh out of school. In a firm like Veritas, slick, corporate, the kind of place where the conference rooms have inspirational quotes on frosted glass, you were expected to keep your head down for the first year. Learn the culture. Prove yourself through small wins. Priya understood that. She didn't mind. What she minded, what began eating at her slowly, quietly like water eroding stone, was Chen. Marcus was 34, senior project manager, 10 years at the firm. He had the kind of confidence that filled a room before he even sat down. Tailored shirts. Perfect handshake. The ability to speak for 45 minutes about something he'd spent 45 minutes reading. The partners loved him. Not because he was brilliant. Priya figured that out in her first month. They loved him because he was familiar. He reminded the senior leadership of themselves. Presentable, polished, fluent in the language of boardroom performance. And he had a gift that mattered more than intellect in corporate environments. He knew how to make other people's ideas sound like his own. The first time it happened to Priya, she told herself it was an accident. She'd stayed late, 2 nights in a row, working on a new client segmentation framework. Something she'd built from scratch, based on a behavioral pattern she'd noticed in the raw data. She presented it to Marcus in their weekly one-on-one, walked him through every layer of it, answered his questions. A week later, Marcus presented it to the executive team. Word for word. Framework unchanged. Not a single mention of Priya. She heard about it secondhand from a colleague. She went home that night, sat on her kitchen floor with a glass of water and told herself, maybe he forgot. Maybe he intended to credit her and it slipped his mind. She gave him the benefit of the doubt. She wouldn't do that again. It happened again 4 months later. And again 6 months after that. Each time with slightly more sophistication. Marcus had learned to put just enough distance between the conversation and the presentation that attribution became murky. He'd absorb ideas from junior analysts, let them sit for 2 or 3 weeks, then surface them in a meeting as if they'd occurred to him in the shower that morning. He was talented at one thing: packaging. He couldn't generate the intellectual content, but he could wrap it beautifully. He knew which ideas would land with the partners, how to frame data stories in ways that made executives feel smart. He was a translator between the analytical depth of his team and the attention span of the C-suite. And he'd decided at some point that the most efficient way to operate was to take the full credit and keep the source material invisible. Here's what made it especially painful for Priya. It wasn't just the stolen credit. It was the cover story Marcus had constructed around her. In team meetings he called her detail-oriented. Said she was still developing her executive presence. Told one senior partner within earshot of Priya that she was brilliant at execution, but not quite ready for a leadership track. Translation: she was a workhorse, not a racehorse. Valuable precisely because she stayed in place. He had built a narrative that made her too useful to promote and too invisible to threaten him. That was the machine. And she had been feeding it unknowingly for years. The Heron project was supposed to be different. Veritas had landed a $12 million consulting engagement with a Singaporean infrastructure firm. It was the biggest contract they'd brought in 5 years. The partners called it a generational opportunity. Every senior manager in the building wanted to lead it. Marcus got the assignment, and he came to Priya. Not openly, not honestly. He came the way he always did, framed as a collaborative brainstorm, two colleagues thinking through a problem together. He brought coffee. He asked questions. He took notes. Over 4 weeks, Priya poured everything she had into that project. She worked weekends. She built the entire analytical infrastructure for the proposal, the market sizing model, the risk stratification matrix, the 3-scenario financial projection that the partners later said was the most sophisticated piece of analysis they'd seen in years. He built all of it. Marcus reviewed it, made cosmetic edits, and put his name on the deck. When the proposal was delivered, Priya's name appeared on page 47 in a list of analytical contributors. Between two people she'd never spoken to, she found out about the boardroom presentation from a calendar invite she wasn't on. A colleague forwarded it to her by mistake, then quickly sent a follow-up. Oops, wrong person, never mind. Priya didn't respond to that email. She opened the calendar invite, saw Marcus's name, saw the title Heron Project, Stakeholder Reveal, and sat very still for a moment. Then she clicked accept. She walked into that boardroom knowing exactly what was about to happen. She sat in the back. Said nothing. Watched Marcus take the partners through a 90-slide deck that she had built, slide by slide, while he smiled and fielded questions and deflected the technical ones with a polished, "I'll have my team follow up on the specifics." His team. She watched the partners stand and applaud. Watched Marcus shake hands. Watched him glance toward the back of the room and make eye contact with her for exactly 1 second. And in that second something passed between them. Not guilt. Not even acknowledgement. It was a warning. Don't. She drove home in silence. He made dinner. Washed the dishes. Sat down at her kitchen table. Then she opened a new document on her laptop, created a folder called Archive, and began organizing 4 years of evidence she had been collecting without fully knowing why. Because Priya had a habit, one that had seemed like compulsive neatness at the time but now looked like unconscious preparation. She saved everything. Every email. Every draft she'd ever sent Marcus for review. Every Slack message where she'd shared a model or a framework or a half-formed idea. Time-stamped. Threaded. With read receipts where they existed. She had shared documents through the company's internal project management system, a platform called Nexus. And Nexus logged every edit, every access, every version change with user IDs and timestamps baked into the metadata. She'd been the primary editor on every major deliverable for 3 years. Marcus had been the presenter. But the metadata told a different story. She printed nothing. She touched nothing at the office. She simply organized what she already had. Then she went to bed and slept better than she had in months. Here's the thing about patience. Most people mistake it for passivity. They see someone who doesn't react, who doesn't confront, who keeps showing up and doing the work despite everything, and they assume that person has accepted the situation. They're wrong. Patience, in the right hands, is the most dangerous weapon in any room. Priya wasn't passive. She had been watching Marcus operate for 4 years, and in that time she had learned something that he had never bothered to learn about her. She knew exactly how the company worked. Not the org chart. The actual machinery, who trusted whom, who was frustrated with whom, which partners were quietly dissatisfied with the quality of client deliverables, which board members had been asking for the last 2 years, why Veritas's junior talent turnover was so high. She knew things Marcus assumed she didn't know, because he'd never considered that she might be paying attention. 3 weeks after the Heron boardroom presentation, Priya sent an email. Not to Marcus. Not to HR. Not to the partners. To a woman named Eleanor Voss. Eleanor was a non-executive board member at Veritas. One of 3, with a background in organizational development and a known personal interest in talent equity. She joined the board 18 months earlier, and in that time she had asked at 2 separate all-hands meetings why the ratio of women in leadership roles at Veritas hadn't improved despite a decade of stated commitment to diversity. Both times the partners had given polished, unsatisfying answers. Priya had been in the room for both. The email Priya sent Eleanor was 2 paragraphs long. It didn't accuse Marcus. It didn't complain. It didn't make a single emotional claim. It said, "I have been an analyst at Veritas for 4 years. I believe there are patterns in how intellectual contributions are attributed at this firm that may be relevant to questions you've raised about talent development. I have documentation. I would welcome a confidential conversation at your convenience. That was it. Eleanor responded in 4 hours. They met the following Tuesday at a coffee shop 4 blocks from the office. Priya brought a folder. Not a dramatic one. A plain manila folder with printed pages inside, organized in order. Timestamped email chains. Nexus access logs. Side-by-side comparisons of draft documents she'd created and the final presentations those drafts had become. Version histories. Her name in the metadata. Marcus's name in the presenter line. She walked Eleanor through it calmly without editorializing. Just, here is the document I created. Here is when I created it. Here is when Marcus accessed it. Here is the presentation he gave 10 days later. Eleanor read everything without speaking. When Priya finished, Eleanor looked up and asked one question. How many other people on the team have experienced this? Priya had anticipated that question. She slid one more page across the table. She hadn't approached her colleagues dramatically. She hadn't organized a group or started a campaign. She'd simply, over the previous 3 weeks, had quiet conversations with 3 other junior analysts. Damien, Kira, and a contract researcher named Tobias who'd left the firm the previous year. All 4 of them had stories. All 4 of them had evidence. Damien had a presentation where 3 slides were verbatim reconstructions of a model he'd built during a late-night session Marcus had attended. Kira had email timestamps showing she'd sent Marcus a client strategy brief 12 days before he presented an original framework to the same client. Tobias, who no longer worked at Veritas and therefore had nothing to lose, had kept everything. They hadn't coordinated their experiences. They hadn't compared notes until Priya reached out. They just each had a folder. Eleanor Voss said goodbye to Priya, thanked her for coming, and said she needed a few days to understand what she was looking at. Priya nodded, thanked her for her time and walked back to the office. She sat at her desk, answered 3 emails, completed a data validation task and went home at 5:30. She did not tell anyone. She did not act differently. She did not send Marcus a knowing look. She ordered takeout, watched a documentary about migratory birds and went to sleep. You should understand something about how large organizations actually respond to evidence like this. They don't move like a courtroom drama. There's no single confrontation scene. No villain hauled out in handcuffs. What happens is quieter and in many ways more final. Things start to shift in the background. Meetings get rescheduled. People who used to be in the room are suddenly not in the room. The air changes temperature in ways you can feel but not quite articulate. Marcus Chen began experiencing this about 5 weeks after Priya's meeting with Eleanor. The first sign was a project reassignment. He'd been lined up to lead the follow-up engagement with the Singaporean firm, a natural progression from the Heron project success. The extension was worth $8 million. It was, by any measure, the most valuable engagement in the firm's pipeline. He found out it had been reassigned via an internal memo. No explanation. The project went to a senior partner named Ada Ora, who brought in 2 junior analysts to build the analytical framework. One of them was Priya. Marcus went to his primary partner contact, a man named Gerald who had championed him for years, to ask what had happened. Gerald was polite but brief. He said there had been some discussions at the board level about project resource allocation. He said it was not a reflection of Marcus's performance. He said everything was fine. Everything was not fine. And Marcus, who had spent 10 years becoming an expert in reading rooms, knew it. He started to look around, asking questions carefully, the way predators do when they sense a shift in the environment. He talked to people on his team. He reviewed recent conversations for anything that might indicate a problem. He found nothing, because Priya had made sure he would find nothing. The formal review process started 6 weeks later. HR contacted Marcus and informed him that a structured review had been initiated by the board, focused on project attribution practices and contribution documentation. He was told it was a confidential process. He was told he could have an employment attorney present if he wished. He had not expected that last part. The review took 11 weeks. Priya was interviewed twice. Damien, Kira, and Tobias were interviewed. The Nexus metadata was subpoenaed by the firm's legal team, something the partners had apparently not realized was possible until Eleanor raised it. Priya wasn't kept informed of the details. She wasn't supposed to be. She had submitted her documentation and gone back to work. But she wasn't blind either. She watched the small things. The way Gerald stopped stopping by Marcus's desk in the mornings. The way Marcus's name began disappearing from client-facing email threads. The way two of the junior analysts who'd been assigned to Marcus's remaining project quietly asked Priya if she knew of any openings on Adora's team. The machine was moving. The outcome was never announced company-wide. That's not how these things work. What happened was this. Marcus Chen's employment at Veritas Analytics ended on a Thursday. His departure was described in an internal communication as a mutual decision to part ways, effective immediately with a standard severance package. He did not get a farewell lunch. He did not get a LinkedIn post from the partners. He packed his personal belongings on a Thursday afternoon, walked past his team without speaking and left. Priya was not in the office that day. She was presenting the second phase of the Heron project extension to the Singaporean client. Her name on the cover slide, solo presenter, full credit, in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor. She found out Marcus had left when she got back to her desk and saw the internal announcement. She read it once, closed the window, and went back to work. 3 months later, Priya was promoted to senior analyst. 6 months after that, she was offered the lead role on a new service line the firm was building, applied behavioral analytics. Something that was, essentially, an expansion of the framework she had been developing quietly for 4 years. She accepted. Eleanor Voss sent her a handwritten card. Damien got a promotion. Kira was headhunted by a competitor and left for a senior role. Priya wrote her a reference letter. Tobias, who'd left the firm a year earlier, reached out just to say thank you, even though the review had vindicated him after the fact. As for Marcus, he landed at a smaller firm 8 months later. A mid-sized consultancy, respectable but significantly less prestigious. He posted about his exciting new chapter on LinkedIn with the kind of optimism that is really just grief wearing a better outfit. Priya did not comment on the post. She didn't think about him much, honestly. He had work to do. I want to tell you something about Priya that I think matters. She wasn't out for blood. She wasn't building a case so she could watch Marcus suffer. She wasn't fueled by rage, not by the time she acted anyway. She was fueled by something quieter and more durable. She had spent 4 years doing work that no one acknowledged, being told, implicitly and explicitly, that she wasn't ready, wasn't visible enough, wasn't leadership material, by a man who was surviving professionally by consuming her labor without attribution. She simply decided, one evening at her kitchen table, that she wasn't willing to let the story end that way. She didn't attack. She documented. She didn't confront. She organized. She didn't rush. She waited until the moment was right, found the one person in the institution with both the authority and the motivation to care, and gave that person everything they needed. She didn't destroy Marcus Chen. She just made sure the truth was visible. The institution did the rest. There's a certain kind of person, and maybe you've worked with one or for one or lived alongside one, who takes up enormous space and believes the world is organized around their convenience, who mistakes other people's silence for agreement, who misreads patience for passivity, who looks at someone quiet and careful and hardworking and sees a resource, rather than a person. They are almost always wrong about that person. And they almost always find out the hard way. Priya Nair did not announce her victory. She didn't need to. She was too busy building the thing that Marcus Chen had spent 4 years pretending was his. The most dangerous thing you can do in this world is underestimate someone who's been paying attention. Some people mistake patience for weakness, until the quiet person finally decides to stop staying quiet. Subscribe for more stories where intelligence speaks louder than revenge.